The hidden clause. Your pain wasn't random, it was the activation code you agreed to. There's a moment, often in silence, often in suffering, when you realize your life has never been normal and it never will be. Not because you're cursed, not because you're broken, but because you were chosen. And no, not in the romanticized, superhero way. I'm talking about the real thing, a soul-level contract signed before birth, marked in frequencies, not ink. A spiritual agreement made not for comfort but for transformation. And if you're here, if you've been drawn to this video, it's because you've already signed it, whether you remember it or not. Every dark chosen one, every being sent to anchor transformation through shadow agreed to walk this path. But here's the twist: we agreed to forget. We agreed to descend into a system of distortion, into families that wouldn't understand us, into cultures that would suppress our gifts, into bodies that would carry the memory of lifetimes filled with fire, betrayal, collapse. And we agreed to wake up anyway. That's the contract. Not to be perfect, not to be loved, but to remember through the very pain that tried to erase us. This is the paradox of the shadow contract. It's not signed in light. It's signed in between the liminal space between soul and source. You don't remember signing it with your mind. You remember it through your suffering, through the betrayals that cracked your identity, through the loneliness that haunted your childhood, through the nights you begged the sky for answers and heard nothing but silence. That silence wasn't absence. It was the exact moment the contract was activating. You see, the shadow contract doesn't guarantee clarity. It guarantees refinement. It guarantees the destruction of everything you thought you were, so that what you actually are can rise in its place. It guarantees that your old self will die 1,000 deaths before your truth is allowed to breathe. That's the price, and not everyone is willing to pay it. But you already did. That's why you've survived things others couldn't imagine. That's why your nervous system feels like it's wired for war and wonder at the same time. That's why love has always felt dangerous and truth has always felt like home. And here's where it gets real. The contract isn't written in words. It's written in initiations. Every trauma, every collapse, every identity death, those aren't punishments. They're clauses. They're the fine print of your mission. You agreed to be broken so you could embody what wholeness actually is. You agreed to lose everything so you could remember that your power doesn't come from what you have, it comes from what you are. But let me ask you something uncomfortable. How much of your life have you spent resisting the very path you came here to walk? How many times have you tried to be normal, to fit in, to be light when your soul was forged in storm? How many times have you feared your own depth, your own fire, your own knowing because it didn't match what the world told you was safe? That resistance is part of the contract too, because you must forget before you remember. You must collapse before you rise. You must doubt yourself so deeply that when clarity finally arrives, it becomes unshakable. That's why your awakening didn't come gently. That's why your gifts didn't bloom in a meadow, they erupted in the middle of your breakdown. That's how dark chosen ones come online, not through comfort, it's through confrontation. And once you realize this, once you stop seeing your pain as a mistake and start seeing it as a map, everything changes. Your suffering becomes sacred. Your wounds become weapons. Your silence becomes a signal. Because now you know you are not a victim of your story. You are the author of it. And the plot twist was never that you were weak. It was that you were remembering how powerful you've always been by facing the exact things that were designed to make you forget. But here's the deeper layer. The shadow contract doesn't just initiate you, it tests you constantly. Not because you're unworthy, because your frequency is dangerous to the matrix, because your clarity is a threat to the illusion. So the test becomes this: can you hold your center while everything around you tries to make you forget who you are? Can you walk into a room where no one sees you and still embody your power? Can you say yes to your truth, even when it costs you comfort, connection, or control? Because that's the real initiation. Not just awakening, but embodiment. And embodiment means you stop negotiating with your mission. You stop asking for permission to be deep, to be intense, to be different. You stop diluting your truth to make others comfortable. You stop seeking validation from a system you came here to dismantle. And here's the moment it all clicks. Once you accept the contract, truly accept it, you stop suffering in the same way. The pain doesn't disappear, but it gains context. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what part of me is being activated by this? You stop fearing breakdowns and start recognizing them as portals. You stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as reborn. The veiled assignment, why your darkness was never a curse, but a sacred technology. There's a moment in every chosen one's journey where the pain becomes so loud, the silence inside of it finally starts to speak. And when it does, it doesn't whisper, it roars. That roar is not rage, it's recognition. The soul realizing that everything you've called a curse was actually a coded assignment, that your darkness was never a punishment. It was a technology, an ancient, living, breathing force embedded in your being, not to destroy you, but to unlock you. We've been taught to fear darkness, to suppress it, to shame it into silence. But for the dark chosen ones, that same darkness is not just part of the journey, it is the key. You were born with a frequency that doesn't just survive chaos, it translates it. You walk into rooms and feel what others cannot name. You sense patterns beneath conversations. You feel timelines pulsing in the air. That sensitivity? That intensity? It's not dysfunction. It's design. You were built to perceive beyond the veil. And in order to do that, your nervous system had to be cracked open by life itself. That's why your life never made sense. That's why you were thrown into situations that shattered you before you had a language to process them. That's why you were abandoned, betrayed, silenced, misunderstood. Not because you were weak, but because your soul needed to wake up early, earlier than most, earlier than logic, earlier than your own identity. Because the contract you signed wasn't just about healing, it was about transmitting. And transmission requires refinement. But here's the part nobody tells you. The refinement process doesn't feel spiritual. It feels like drowning. It feels like being erased. It feels like being burned alive in your own story. And that's because the ego you built in survival cannot carry the frequency you came here to embody. So it must collapse. It must dissolve. It must be surrendered. And the moment you stop trying to preserve the false self is the moment your true self begins to emerge, not as a concept, but as a force. This is where the shadow technology activates. Because now, you're not just aware of your pain, you're conscious within it. You're not running from your triggers, you're tracking them. You're not escaping your darkness, you're decoding it. And when you do that, something wild begins to happen. Your pain becomes a portal. Your trauma becomes a transmitter. Your story becomes a spell, not a curse, but a casting of clarity into collective confusion. And that's what changes everything. Because now your darkness isn't something to hide. It's something to hone. You begin to realize that the parts of you others called too much are the exact parts the world needs most. Your intensity? That's your precision. Your rage? That's your boundary. Your grief? That's your depth. Your silence? That's your signal. You're not broken. You're coded differently. And now you remember why. Because your mission isn't to fit in. Your mission is to disrupt distortion. But let's go deeper. Why would a soul choose a path like this? Why would anyone agree to incarnate into pain, into chaos, into systems designed to mute them? Because you weren't sent here to play the game. You were sent here to recode the grid. The collective field, the simulation we call reality, is built on unconscious agreements. Agreements to stay small, to stay silent, to stay asleep. And your energy? It doesn't agree. It doesn't comply. It doesn't submit. That's why you've always felt friction. That's why the system pushed back every time you tried to be yourself. Because your very presence is a glitch in the matrix, a living contradiction, a walking frequency that says, I remember who I am and I don't need your permission to be it. So now comes the question that changes everything. What if your darkness wasn't your enemy, but your equipment? What if the very energy you've been trying to fix was actually your soul's most advanced technology? What if your shadow isn't something to heal, but something to wield? Because here's the truth, shadow is not evil. Shadow is unconscious potential. It's energy that hasn't yet been given direction. And when you bring awareness into it, when you move into it with reverence instead of rejection, it doesn't consume you, it carries you. It becomes your compass, your curriculum, your code. And that's why the shadow contract is so sacred. Because it doesn't just initiate you into pain, it initiates you into power. But not the kind of power the world teaches, not domination, not control, but energetic sovereignty. The ability to choose your frequency regardless of circumstance. The ability to move through chaos without being consumed by it. The ability to stand in your truth, even when no one else recognizes it. That's the mark of a dark, chosen one. Not how much light you radiate, but how much truth you can embody in the face of distortion. And in that embodiment, your field starts to speak louder than your words. Your eyes begin to see through the veil. Your body becomes a tuning fork for timelines. You start feeling when something is off, not because someone told you, but because your being knows. That knowing? That's not intuition. That's cellular memory. That's your contract talking. That's your soul saying, we've done this before, and we came back to finish what we started. So now, the question is no longer why me? The question is, Now that I remember, what am I going to do with it? Because this is the moment the contract becomes activated by choice. The moment you stop surviving your story and start transmitting from it. The moment you stop hiding and start serving, not from perfection, but from presence. Not from answers, but from embodiment. Not from light or dark, but from the full spectrum of your truth. Full activation. You are no longer the student of pain, you are the architect of frequency. There's a point in your journey where you realize you're no longer learning from pain, you're creating through it. That's the moment the contract shifts. That's the moment you stop being the student of suffering and become the architect of frequency. All the nights you cried out for answers, all the years you questioned your worth, all the moments you thought you were broken, they were never about punishment. They were about preparation, preparing you to carry something most souls aren't ready to hold, the weight of unfiltered truth. Truth is heavy, not because it's wrong, but because it pierces illusion. It burns through false identities. And the ones chosen to carry it must die and be reborn again and again. That's what you've done. And that's what makes you rare. You didn't just survive the fire, you became it. You didn't just lose who you were, you remembered who you've always been. Not a seeker, not a follower, but a coder of consciousness. And now the contract becomes choice. You see, the shadow contract was never about suffering endlessly. It was about reaching this point, the moment where you can see your entire life, every betrayal, every collapse, every silent scream as sacred data, or a cosmic algorithm. And now that you've decoded it, you are no longer at the mercy of your story. You are the glitch in the simulation, the one who broke out of the loop. The one who woke up in the middle of the dream and realized, I am not here to be understood, I am here to be felt. Because that's what frequency does. It's not about words. It's not about appearances. It's not about how good or spiritual you seem. It's about what your presence does to a room. It's about what your field does to someone's nervous system. It's about what your silence transmits when you walk in with nothing to prove and everything to remember. The final realization of the shadow contract is this: your presence is the transmission. You don't even need to speak. You don't need to explain. Your field is encoded with lifetimes of remembrance. When people are around you, one of two things happens: they either wake up or they run. That's how you know you're active. That's how you know the contract has been fulfilled. Because now, your very existence becomes a signal, a pulse, a living, breathing vortex of remembrance. But here's the thing. That power doesn't mean you dominate. It doesn't mean you control. It doesn't mean you save anyone. It means you stay anchored in truth while others navigate their own illusions. You become the mirror, not the master, the beacon, not the savior. You stop trying to pull others into the light or drag them through the dark. You simply hold your frequency and let those who are ready tune in. And when they do, something ancient happens. Not a conversation, not a conversion, but a recognition, soul to soul, field to field, contract to contract. They feel you, and they remember something they haven't touched in lifetimes, because your vibration unlocks them. Not from ego, from essence. This is the power of a fully activated dark chosen one. You don't follow paths, you create them through resonance. You don't ask for permission, you move as permission. You don't seek approval, you embody alignment so fiercely that reality bends around your clarity. And with that clarity comes responsibility. Because now you know too much to pretend. You've seen behind the veil. You've walked through the underworld. You've tasted the silence of Source. So the question becomes, what do you do with what you now know? Do you go back to sleep? Do you dilute your truth to make others comfortable? Do you hide your gifts behind spiritual language and safe branding? Or do you finally own the fact that your presence is the revolution? This is the final stage, not enlightenment, not perfection, integration. When you no longer need to be light or dark, when you no longer seek to be seen or validated, when you no longer chase purpose but become a living purpose in motion. Every breath, every word, every step, not from ego, not from performance, but from embodied frequency. You want to know the real magic? It's not in rituals. It's not in mantras. It's not even in mystical downloads. It's in the moment you can sit in your own shadow, look it in the eye, and say, I see you. I honor you. Let's build something together. That's when your shadow becomes sacred. That's when your darkness becomes divine. That's when your contract stops being a burden and becomes a weapon of light encoded in truth. So I ask you one final time, are you ready to stop surviving your destiny and start living it? Because now the story changes. You are no longer the one being initiated. You are the one activating others. Your life becomes a map. Your voice becomes a key. Your presence becomes a portal. And when you walk into the world with that awareness no longer needing to be fixed, no longer needing to be seen, you become the one thing this world cannot manipulate, a sovereign, embodied, multidimensional creator of reality. You are not here to be light. You are not here to be dark. You are here to be the force that remembers both and transcends them. This is why every dark chosen one signs a shadow contract without knowing it. Because the moment you do remember, the world is never the same again.